Welcome to the Fleet Geeks podcast. We're here to help develop fleet and transport professionals. Do you want to progress and develop your skills and knowledge? We promise to bring lively conversation and debate around interesting issues and keep you bang up to date with changes in our awesome industry. The Fleet Geeks are a community of professionals, and if you enjoy the podcast, why not join the discussion for free in the Fleet Geek community over on Facebook.
This podcast, I'm joined by Chris and Sarah from Weightmans for the second podcast, where we're going to be looking backwards to 2023. Yeah, it was 2023. We are in 2024. I'm just having a moment there. I shan't get Sarah and Chris to introduce themselves again. If you are listening to the first time and hearing Sarah and Chris, please do listen back to the previous podcast where we've done a bit of an introduction and we've had a look through some of the stuff that Sarah and Chris do on a day-to-day basis, which is really fascinating. I recommend you drop back and listen to that, and you'll get a great introduction from these guys. This podcast is very much looking backwards at 2023, some of the learnings, key takeaways from the year. We're going to be talking about with Sarah around transport managers, the challenges around multiple operating centres and multiple operators' licences in different areas, as well as some things to take away around due diligence for transport managers and about notification of convictions as well. We're going to touch on whistleblowing, and then we're going to look at some challenges around historic restricted licences and own account operators, and some of the things that may be considerations for them for the coming year, and things to think about for 2024 when they start to review their operator's licence. So if it's all okay, I'm going to kick on with looking at transport managers, their roles with multiple licences and operating centres. Sarah, are you able to tell us a bit more about the challenges you saw last year with that?
Yeah, thanks very much. So we have seen quite a lot of challenges when it comes to transport managers and being on multiple licences, and whilst that is a great thing, and we really advocates for it and ensuring that as a transport manager you get the right mix within your role, it's really important to consider just how many vehicles you're looking after, and it really needs to be realistic. I think that's our main kind of point. Can you look after the amount of vehicles you're saying you are looking after? Because at the end of the day, if you're called to a public inquiry or any questions are asked around your ability to be able to manage the fleet, is your response one that you'd be happy with? And can you provide a response that is effective and shows that you do maintain that continuous and effective control? Because that's the main thing at the end of the day. And we've had hearings this past year where we've seen that transport managers have spread themselves too thin, and it's just not working out. And particularly if you're an internal transport manager and then you take on some external responsibilities, whilst that's still well within your right to do so, just ensure that you can fit that into your week and your life. It's really important to ensure that if there's multiple areas that you're on a licence for, can you actually get to those areas? If you're on a licence in the southwest and in Scotland, how realistic is it that you can go between those two areas and actually have that control over the vehicles that run around those areas? And that's not just questions we ask, that's questions that we see from the Traffic Commissioner. When we see transport managers being added to licences, we see the Traffic Commissioner asking those very questions. Can this person that's in Cornwall get up to Scotland and effectively manage the licences there? And is that possible? So I think it's just really considering where you are, your location, the amount of vehicles you say you can manage, and if that's realistic in a normal working week. Because as much as you may want to be on multiple licences, you just need to ensure that you can fit it all into your life, and so that's our key takeaway with that. I think with multiple sort of operators' licenses and multiple operating centres, and just ensuring that you're there with it. I think another thing is the due diligence that the company is taking when it comes to having new transport managers on their licence. So again, I see this quite often where maybe, the company's had a bit of a fallout with the transport manager, they've ended up at public inquiry, they need a new transport manager quite quickly, and so everything's put in place to really get that transport manager on board ASAP. And then I normally come in and then I say, so have you checked if this person has got good repute? And often they haven't, because they're in such a rush to just get a replacement, And I think a key point here is it's so important to do your background checks. And whilst at an interview, everyone puts their best foot forward and everyone seems brilliant, it's just so important for companies to check whether the transport manager is on other licences, how many vehicles are on those other licences, if they can handle your fleet, what your fleet looks like, and whether it's an easy come and manage or if there's a big overhaul of the operation that's needed, and also if that transport manager has had any regulatory action in the past, because and that's not to say that they can't be your transport manager, but it's just a consideration. And again, it's something the Traffic Commissioner might come back and ask you on. So you as a company need to feel confident that you know where you're going with that, and you say, well, actually, yeah, we did know about this, but it was 20 years ago, so we're prepared to take that risk because we've seen that this transport manager has done an excellent job. And it's fine. It's just doing your due diligence and really checking that you're happy with the person that you're going to put on your license.
Yeah, awesome, Sarah. I think I just have to echo that actually, because it sort of resonated with me with a recent case that I've been looking after one of our clients with, and we've had a operations manager who's held a transport manager CPC qualification, but as part of a restricted operator, and we've gone to edit that operator to a standard national, or increase them to a standard national, and then put that operations manager onto the transport manager role as a named transport manager. And actually it was picked up by the caseworker that the transport manager was named on another licence, and the operator themselves weren't aware of that situation. So interestingly, that's all now gone through and been granted, but that application process has sort of generated this challenge that the operator weren't aware of these other duties on their transport manager that they're making an application for, and that's a really interesting thing around that due diligence element. And I joked when we were preparing for this around a prenup, but actually turns out that's a thing, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, well, it's a thing we help companies with quite often, because again, they come to us and they say, well, we've seen this transport manager, we think he's great, we really want him. And we're like, okay, just calm down then. Before you get to engagement stage, let's just take a step back. Let's put some sort of contractual things in place here, so you sort of sign them up to your terms rather than theirs. I think it's just really important just to make sure that the business has got what they expect as well, because whilst transport managers have a very high standard that they work towards, the business need to know that what they want from the transport manager is what they're going to get. So we often help companies by putting those sort of contractual sort of terms in place before they onboard the transport manager, just to make sure that everything's in place before they get started and it kind of doesn't go well or something like that.
And just to add to that, it can be really simple stuff. It can be saying that if you're a transport manager, you're coming to work for us, you're declaring that to us, as well as on the TM1 form, that you're not nominated on any other licenses, and that you're going to consult with us before you nominate yourself on your mate Jim's license in the background without us knowing about, and that you're going to and that perhaps you're going to make a declaration to us as well that you haven't, for example, got a difficult licensing history. And the reason that matters is because if you do barrel in and appoint a transport manager, and then the Traffic Commissioner picks up on this and starts putting you under the spotlight, as an operator it becomes a little bit challenging, because you're then having to say, actually, I didn't know about this, and you're having to make an admission that you didn't do your quality control, you didn't do your due diligence, and you're already on the back foot. And so you are whereas if you're in a position where you can say, well, actually, what more could I have done, then you're in a much stronger position.
Hello, it's Shani from Flagship Partners. We are really proud to sponsor the Fleet Geeks podcast. If you need expert advice or training for your fleet business, make Flagship Partners your first choice. We are really excited to announce the launch of our Transport Manager Academy. With expert development for fleet leaders, we offer fully accredited initial Transport Manager CPC training, CPC refresher, and operator license awareness training, as well as mentoring, support, and professional development beyond the qualification. Our vision is to develop elite fleet professionals.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. I think that's a really important thing that operators need to think about, and certainly a bit of a challenge for operators to make sure that their systems are in the right place, because it does open you up for scrutiny if something like that happens.
It does.
What is that recruitment process that you've got? So very good. And then the other part of the other element of this, Sarah, was around the convictions and notification of convictions. What sort of has come up for you on that area?
So this is something we get asked all the time. What do we need to declare? What's declarable? And we've gone into detail with this with a lot of our clients. And I think the main thing here is just taking a step back and looking at what's happened and you know, deciding if the Traffic Commissioner needs to be made aware of that. And the most important point about this one is, if the Traffic Commissioner knows, brilliant. There's nothing being hidden, there's nothing being concealed, there's no kind of coming back on it. And yes, the Traffic Commissioner might ask questions if something's happened, like a health and safety conviction, and you're telling the Traffic Commissioner about it. Of course, they're well within their right to ask questions. Is it something that might affect the roadworthiness of vehicles? Was it due to a vehicle? Was it due to the maintenance? Was it, you know, those questions that are just normal? But if the regulator knows about it, then they can't come at you for saying that you didn't tell them. Now, we've been at hearings in this past year where companies have not told the regulator about things that have happened, and it's a whole range of different things, to be honest. And I don't think there's one answer. We found there isn't one answer on what you should tell and what you shouldn't tell, and you know, how far you go with what you let the regulator know. But it's just taking that kind of commercial approach on things. If something's affected your business, you need to tell the regulator. If it's affected you in such a way that you've received a conviction from it, then yes, again, you're likely going to need to tell the regulator. And that's something we can provide advice on, and we do provide advice on a lot, and it's something you need to just consider. Don't make a sort of rash decision and just type out an email and click send and hope for the best. It's something that you can approach in kind of a letter and in correspondence, and in a way that, you know, makes you as an operator look like you really have thought about this rather than just taking a really quick approach.
Yeah, that makes total sense, to be fair. And I suppose these things don't get found proactively, so to speak, but I imagine it's something that is then used at a public inquiry where it's then open forum.
Definitely.
That all of a sudden the carpet gets pulled up and there's maybe some skeletons that have been swept underneath the carpet, or the door opens to the wardrobe and all of a sudden everything comes clattering out. Yeah,
exactly.
Is that the situation?
I mean, what I'd say to that is, it's not easy. It's not easy, Pete. The legislation is nowhere near as clear as it could be. There are certainly certain convictions that will always need to be notified, and they're in the legislation, and there's very clear guidance around that. And then there's other areas which are notifiable by virtue of the fact that they fall within the category of certain transport offences and the like. But then, if you're a standard licence holder listening to this podcast, just take a minute to look sometime at your operator's license and the standard conditions that are on it, and you'll find one of the conditions is that a condition is to notify the Traffic Commissioner of any event that could affect your good repute. Mm-hmm. And then if you go to the statutory documents and say, well, I wonder what is an event that could affect my good repute, it's far from clear, because it's in the eye of the beholder whether or not something could affect your good repute. And so a lot of what we do is advising around that, because taken to extreme, you're not going to be notifying the Commissioner of every time one of your drivers goes 1 minute over a 4.5 hours. They'd be absolutely inundated, and that would be, and if you've got robust systems and procedures in place to monitor and deal with that, then I don't think anyone would suggest an absolute zero tolerance approach. But then, of course, it becomes a sliding scale with other issues, and I think the point Sarah is making is absolutely right, that it's about that level of trust and transparency with the regulator, and it's one of the more common areas we advise on. So if you're in doubt about something, if it's a non-conviction, if it's just an incident that's happened internally, maybe it hasn't come to the radar of the police or DVSA or anything, but it's something that you're concerned about. Do we need to report this because of this incident involving this driver? Then it's certainly one to get some proper advice on.
Fantastic, thank you. And so that's the first key learning, and then the second one was around whistleblowing. Are you able to elaborate a bit more on that, please, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, this was something that it might just be anecdotal, I don't know, but we seem to have seen a lot of it this year. We've seen a lot of situations where operators that we've worked with, but it's in some cases local councils, but also private operators, have been in a position where somebody within the organisation has reported their employer to the Traffic Commissioner directly. For whatever it might be. For example, it could be an allegation that that the operator's not running safe systems or not having safe procedures in place around something or other. And sometimes it's possible for the operator to have a good idea as to what this relates to, but other times it really isn't. And you can end up with a situation where the Traffic Commissioner will write to an operator saying, we've been made aware of information, and we're not going to disclose where it comes from. It might even be anonymous, but we've been made aware of information about X, Y, and Z, and we want DVSA to come in and do investigation, and we want you to explain what's happened about it. And it can be quite alarming when that happens, because you're on the back foot. You've got to be very, very careful around employment law and whistleblowing, and take advice around that, because it's a very sensitive area and lots of protections around that. But equally, you need to have enough information to know how to respond. And what you don't want to happen is and DVSA to come in and review it and say, actually, we're satisfied that the allegation was completely unfounded, but whilst we've been here, we've noticed 5 other things that are causing us concern, and so we're going to be escalating proceedings against you on that basis. Again, something that we've seen happen. So I think the message I would have is tread very, very carefully if something like that happens to you. It is remarkably easy to put in an anonymous complaint. Sometimes a competitor might even put in an anonymous complaint against you. A DVSA even have a website where they do invite people to put in any concerns, and we've seen that happen. So just I suppose be aware and be and take it seriously when it happens, because it can be a very high risk area.
Yeah, and it's the whole picture there as well, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, you might never find out what that whistleblowing complaint was. You may just know the area that it's in. So it's just making sure that you take a holistic approach to it and ensure that you're checking everything to make sure you're happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose all the more reason for making sure you've got the robust systems in place proactively to enable that those in glass houses can't throw stones, so to speak. Very good, very good. Thank you very much. And then the third area was around own account operators and restricted licenses. There's maybe some sort of evolutionary things to think about there.
Again, this is one that we seem to have been helping a lot of operators with recently. The age-old assumption was that if the stuff in the back of your wagon belongs to you, then you can have a restricted license. Nice and simple. Unfortunately, if you actually look at the legislation, if you look at the guidance, and if you look at the way that the traffic commissioners and the courts are interpreting that these days, is that it's not quite as simple as that. If, for example, you are a waste operator, and all you're doing is your entire business model is collecting waste from customer A, transferring that waste to recycling facility B, and you're just the haulier in between, then even if you have arrangements or contractual arrangements or otherwise whereby that waste belongs to you for that journey, actually what you're doing there is clearly hire or reward. You're being paid to move the waste. You're not being paid to process it. The transfer is the movement of the waste isn't part of a wider business. You are effectively a haulier, and therefore it's hire and reward, and therefore the commissioners are likely to consider that to be something that requires a standard license, and then you could find yourself in a position of operating without the appropriate license. And there's loads of variations around that. It's not just for the waste sector; it can be for any sector where your business model involves moving your own goods, but once it starts to be the case that actually that's really the whole of it, and it's not just ancillary to another part of your business, it is effectively what you're doing as your business, starts to look a lot like you're being a haulier, then that's the time to start questioning that, asking those questions, getting some advice on it. Because we have been seeing traffic commissioners taking action against operators for exactly that sort of thing. And the commissioners, understandably, generally prefer standard licenses because they need to have a nominated transport manager. You need to have higher levels of financial standing. There are greater securities around that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think one of the challenges I see with clients that we work with is that it's the age-old thing around an operator gets pulled over and the DVSA have a look and they wonder why the operator's working on logbook, or they wonder why the operator's on a restricted licence and not a national licence. And the most common argument that I come across is not one that's based on the legislation, it's one that's based on, but that's what everyone in the industry does.
Yeah.
Have you come across that? Have you come across that
Have
rule?
we come across it?
But this is unfair because the rest of the industry do that, and it's a competitive disadvantage. And I think raising awareness of this stuff's really important, because actually we often take the industry standard practice as golden, don't we, and don't challenge it. But actually, the regulator would expect the operator to be really comfortable. And I imagine being sat in a PI, if your argument is that that's what Bob does down the road and he does the same work as I do, I don't think the response is going to be particularly favourable.
Yeah, but we all have a natural sense of fairness, and so I have a lot of sympathy for an operator who's looking down the road and seeing somebody else do it, maybe doing something differently, and thinking, well, why does he get to do it and why don't I? And so I have a lot of sympathy for that. But that's when it's those. I mean, maybe that's what's fueling a lot of these anonymous complaints to DVSA, perhaps.
Quite potentially. I think that is a challenge, because we all want fair. The underpinning purpose of operator licenses is around safety, but it is also around a fair operating.
Yeah,
costs,
absolutely.
And I suppose if an industry has been operating a certain way, or the perceived industry operating procedure is a certain way, and it's slowly being found to be non-compliant, then additionally people are going to be getting their noses put out of joint and want to level the playing field. So it's a challenge, isn't it? Fantastic. Well, what fantastic learnings for the listeners on those key areas around transport manager and operator licensing, and doing your due diligence and making sure that you're notifying convictions, making sure you've got an eye out for whistleblowing, as well as making sure you've got the right type of licence as well. So thank you both, Chris and Sarah, for joining me on today's episode, and I look forward to you joining me on the next one, where we look at the things that might be coming in the future and coming in 2024, and things to keep an eye out for. Listeners, thanks for joining us, and hopefully you'll subscribe, and please do share any feedback in the comments. Take care now. See you soon.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please share with your friends and colleagues too. Join us for free on Facebook with the Fleet Geeks community for transport and fleet managers. Fleet Geeks offers ongoing professional development, networking and mentoring too. So get in touch with me, Pete Rushmer, on any social media platform to find out more.